You may recognize Ali Quli Qarai as a Quran translator, but the importance here is the actual text. Now, I don't know why some things weren't transliterated, because some of them don't have the vowel marks, and if almost everything in here, 90-something% of it is not only translated but transliterated, I don't know why they didn't do that. But Islamic piety, huh? So Islamic piety is based on the Quran, what the Prophet taught, and largely understood as how other people worked it, whether the Ahl Bayt are the righteously guided companions and scholars of various sorts. That's how things work. And you can see here, how later generations use the primary sources of Islam to compose further supplications, and they'd pray using they'd supplicate using a Quran verse or saying the Prophet, and weave them together in another supplication. And we also see indication that a lot of what people attribute to the Shia is, in specific, is right, but sometimes it's not right as one says. The concealment, the lying to save your life is a lot different than lying on principle or lying because somebody's a disbeliever. Mostly it's just in hiding. You don't have to say this, that, and the other. And that's also a tact thing. It's not necessarily dishonest to not, say, but the invoking or evoking the dead or the prophets, however you're going to say it. I don't think there's any angel worship in here. I don't remember any at the very least. Is really not, that takes a person out of the fold of Islam. Also, we can say that the cursing is somebody who changes a book. I think the Sunnis are in a better position because they say that they stick to the Quranic reference in that regard. And they don't, they tend not to have this idea of cursing people. If they get guided, well, then the curse is lifted. It's sort of, well, their life is cursed because of this, God and the angels and that, and but changing the books is what you need to do. When the Sunnis see in one of the Sahih books or one of the other ones that are more or less historical, depending, but not the size probably, is that when they realize that a narration isn't as historical or even flawed or goes against truth, then they say something, they change it. When a certain person narrated certain stuff when he was younger versus older, and particularly the older, when he was older, the narration stemming from that had words left out that gave a different view on the story, and even then perhaps we need to change that. And if we're given the option between a prophet making a mistake and one of the companions that was not infallible, or infallible is the wrong word, that's really innocent, is a better way to say it, because what good is infallible? It's not really an example you can follow, but somebody who didn't make a mistake when they could have made a mistake, now that's an example that you could look up to follow. as I said, there's, it tells you what to do with the Quran. It tells certain prayers that the Prophet said on certain occasions, and that's the main point. Is it's not that the Shia don't pass on the traditions of the Prophet. The point is that they continue a living working of them, at least through the initial chain of examples, and a close chain of examples, rather than anybody in the community that's passing on stories. It's particular people that are more or less sanctioned. But the breaking down of the calendar is one of the interesting things. And you find that a lot of what the Sunnis are going to say are practice that is called bid'ah, which is not really appropriate to say it's a sinful innovation when it's really not going against anything in the religion. Some of the stuff that people say in that regard is. But you find that the Shia actually passed on in their traditions a lot of the stuff that the Sunnis practice that is not, they don't know the source of it. But in general, when it's attributed to one of the 12 Imams, are the Prophet's, or Fatima Sarah, or such, then their sayings are either an interpretation of the revelation and inspiration that came to Muhammad, or they're supposed to be directly passing it on. So, but I don't know what to say without totaling too much of the context. The contents of the book. You have prayers of different individuals, which kind of gives rise to what you could say the Sufi traditions. And this sheikh said this prayer on this occasion, and this person this prayer on this occasion. In the second book, we can talk about the ziyaras in more depth. And these visitations, well, perhaps this is what happened to a person in a dream and that sort of thing. And when it gets to the stuff that people would say is un-Islamic behavior, or even behavior that kicks a person out of Islam, well, a lot of this stuff is, well, perhaps different use of stuff. Now, if you have a dream, or if you go to the actual grave and say something, even it could be considered different than if you were invoking or evoking an entity. You can say peace be upon you and that sort of stuff when you visit a graveyard, but peace be upon the person who's not even there. That's a whole lot different of a story. But hopefully this gives a huge amount of examples. You can spend a lifetime flipping through a book like this and repeating and repeating and repeating, and have a Quran to the side. It's really about living a life rather than the nitbits of which are a good example. But yeah, instead of the little bits of, oh, this was eaten in this and this, there's certainly traditions about that, but this is, a life of piety is what spirituality is all about, right?